Welcome to this section on network neutrality, how to identify discriminations and advanced solutions. My name is Luca Belli, I work at Terrorist University, and I'm the founder of the Dynamic Coalition on Network Neutrality. Today we will co-moderate this session together with Primavera that works at the Bergman Center for Internet Society and is also the co-founder of the Dynamic Coalition on Network Neutrality. So this meeting is aimed to be a meeting of the Dynamic Coalition of Network Neutrality. So this is a group, an open and multi-stakeholder group that was established as a component of the United Nations Intergovernmental Forum, and that aims at analyzing the network neutrality debate and provide some solutions and provide a platform to envisage common initiatives. So today this panel will be structured as in the first part as an interactive, hopefully, discussion with my distinguished panelists, and then it will be a fishbowl, so every attendee can have the possibility to join the panel, to ask questions, to contribute and steering the discussion. Why have we felt the need to establish this dynamic coalition? Because the network neutrality debate is a 15 years old debate. Over the last 15 years, we had several examples of how internet traffic management can be discriminatory. The debate was started 15 years ago by Professors Lemley and Lessig with their seminal paper on the end, where they were arguing that the tremendous innovation that is allowed by the internet depends essentially on the open nature of the internet protocols, the open software that implements these protocols, and also on the end-to-end principle that decentralize the intelligence of the network into its edges. And the consequence of those principles is a non-discriminatory treatment that was later defined network neutrality. So knowing that this network neutrality principle stems from the technical core of the internet architecture, I would like to start asking some questions to Alejandro Pisanti from the Autonomous University of Mexico and ICE of Mexico, who is a very known representative of the technical community. So I would like to start by asking to Alejandro, what is a non-discriminatory or reasonable traffic management for the technical community?
Thank you, Luca. Can you hear me well? Thank you, Luca, and cheers to all and the panel. Thanks for putting this together and for the work that you've been doing on the network neutrality coalition, which is a very interesting form of organization emerging from the internet governance world. The network neutrality, I mean, to your question, as with any interesting technical question, the answer is it depends. Depends very much what is network neutrality, or what is reasonable, non-discriminatory things that you can do to traffic and still be respecting network neutrality. Depends very much on the conditions, depends very much on the network you are running and who you are running it for. So it's very different if you are running a local network at your home, or if you are running a public service, which is, on the other hand, not necessarily the internet service is classified as a public service. So it doesn't have the kind of strong legal obligations of must carry or must offer or common carriage that a few countries have. Actually, they are not that common even. So it's hard to see from the Anglo world, which has this common carriage obligation, that many countries don't even think about it. You're the owner of the network and you're basically free to do with it almost anything you want. Now, to very specific practices, for example, you have something. The most radical view of what network neutrality is, and therefore what forbids anything you would do, is what we call, in ICE of Mexico, for example, the 5 alls, which would be the traffic you carry must have allow for all ports, all protocols, all contents, all origins, and all destinations. This is clearly not viable when you're operating a network You have to be selective with some traffic. You may see a DDoS attack developing. You may see, for example, port 25 blocking, which was in the questions you asked previous to the panel. That's a recommended practice, but it's open and transparent for everybody, and you tell your users that you're going to be doing it. So one of the conditions then is you shouldn't be doing anything you cannot tell your users. That's a reasonable definition there as well.
You have elaborated an interesting framework to assess internet traffic management practices according to the from a risk management perspective. You have made a contribution in the report of the Dynamic Coalition elucidating this framework. Can you tell us something about this risk management model that you have elaborated and on which natural neutrality definition is it based?
Thank you. Yes, what I did last year after your invitation is I've been teaching for a while on different issues related to internet, and particularly internet security comes up very often. And what I've told people is to stop thinking so absolutely about security and even stop using the word security at work, because it's a very absolute. What we do really have, what we can really work on is risk management. Because in risk management, you begin by identifying what the risk is, what the asset you own that is at risk. You can quantify the risk, for example, how likely or probable it is, and what the impact or cost of the risk is. And then you have a certain series of disciplines which merge in different ways of looking at this. You can look at identifying, detecting, preventing. Once you have detected a risk that's materializing, responding in a planned way. You have contingency planning, you have business continuity planning, you have mitigation. All these are the risk management disciplines. So applied to network neutrality violations or to traffic management practices, you have to be able, first of all, to detect whether something is going wrong. So you can use something as crude as a pretty good tool as net analyzer, or you may have to do something really sophisticated to find out whether an ISP is filtering traffic selectively or throttling it, which is even harder to detect because it's only becoming slower, but it doesn't disappear. And then you have to be able to respond. And the responses that we usually have are, first of all, look for an alternative, go through a VPN, which may slow you, but may keep open some ports or sites, and so forth. Or you may want to actually protest as a consumer to the ISP, or go for legislation, which in some countries is seen as the only way to guarantee network neutrality. And to your question, this framework is not based on any specific network neutrality definition. It's on traffic management practices. So it's up to you to decide when the violation, what to quantify the violation. No, it's minor, marginal, doesn't affect many users, or this is really radical and we have to go to full-scale lobbying against the legislation.
Thank you, Alejandro. So we will now focus on the importance of net neutrality and what is the impact that it has on innovation, both in the commercial perspective and non-commercial perspective. So I will invite Renata Avila from the World Foundation, and I will ask you if you could present why it is so important for you to maintain an open and neutral internet, and what are the risks of discriminatory traffic management practice on online innovation.
Well, I will introduce this very basic idea that I have and I was discussing. And he said, we are at this very beginning of new technology. The internet is such new thing that has enabled citizens everywhere to do wonderful things and to create and innovate because of its open nature. And if we we violate the principles of neutrality at this moment of when we still do not know the capacity, the potential that this new technology has. It's like we were locking the primary colors, basically. If we were not allowing anyone else to innovate further. So it's a very simple way to put it. It is we cannot see still the mixes and possibilities of developing that we have ahead, and we cannot imagine still the future. And by locking it, just because of business models of people who are not creative enough and who see in a locked system the only way that they can make money out of something, then we are really locking the possibility of a future that we can still not even the possibility to imagine. So that's why I think that it's very important to keep the platforms open. And it's not only an issue about the market, and it's not about the issue of consumers, but in these years, in recent years, we have seen an evolution of passive consumers to creators. And by locking the net, we will stay at the consumer's stage. And we will completely neutralize the empowerment, and not only economic empowerment, but the empowerment of all kinds that brings the possibility to create something with this network. So.
And could you say a few words about the RightsCon campaign and whether you can see some kind of intersection between this campaign and the issue of net neutrality?
Well, basically, the neutral networks that do not discriminate specific content or users is one of the principles of the Web we Want, which is a campaign, a positive agenda campaign that we are promoting with a group of organizations, which was co-founded and heavily promoted by one of the leading organizations here in the US, leading the discussion on net neutrality, Free Press. One of his members is here, you can ask him later. And all the members of our advisory board and this coalition, international coalition of organizations, consider that so vital for the future of the internet that it is included as one of the main areas that we will work on. And what we are trying to do is to see in places where we can promote a positive agenda, positive laws, to promote them. I mean, and together with that connected network that can help activists on the ground pushing for that. It comes to my mind the examples that we will talk later, I imagine, of Chile and the Netherlands that are leading examples that we can copy and that we can export. And we can, this vicious circle of exporting bad laws from one country to country, we can kind of transform it in a virtuous circle of sharing experiences and exporting good laws that will keep our internet open.
Thank you, Renata. So I will invite now Jana Wellinger from the Wikimedia Foundation to give us an overview of the Wikipedia Zero initiative, which is an initiative to provide free mobile access to Wikipedia in developing countries. And I will ask you if you could explain how do you think that this initiative is likely to be affected by network neutrality regulation, and also if you could say more generally, how do you think that discriminatory traffic management practice could have an impact on non-commercial activities?
So I'm going to talk to you second point first, just because that's the one that we're all talking about, and I feel like the effect of the lack of net neutrality is sort of really, really important for preserving an open internet for non-commercial activities and for free speech. And we don't hear as much about that aspect of it as we do about the interrelation between innovation and net neutrality. And I think part of that is that non-commercial activities online appear to be becoming marginalized, but really the internet was not designed to be a commercial platform, and so there's a lot of we've seen a lot of business models that have developed over time that are sort of commercial in nature, but there's also really important non-commercial activities that we want to preserve, and we want to make sure that it's a platform where they can evolve further. So in addition to Wikipedia, of course, there's projects like Project Gutenberg or the Internet Archive that are sort of non-commercial projects, but also if we think about it, there's a lot of non-profit advocacy groups that are represented here today that rely on an open network to communicate with their audiences. And also, of course, yes, we're demonstrating as we speak. But also, so it's incredibly important that we're not we make sure that the internet does not become a tiered network where commercial players are able to pay for accessing their users and getting speed access to their users, and non-commercial network content providers are being deprioritized. So that's sort of what the impact on commercial activities from the lack of a strong net neutrality principle. On the flip side, though, we also need to make sure that although we really do need to have a strong net neutrality principle, it needs to be a clearly articulated principle so that it doesn't impact non-commercial projects that are being developed or will develop going forward in a negative way. So one thing that I think the definition of net neutrality should focus on is the idea that the core goal of net neutrality, which is to avoid blocking and avoid creating a two-tiered internet, and focus on the non-discriminatory transmission of data, and so that it doesn't necessarily encompass access to the internet or potentially discriminatory payment for access to the internet. And the reason is that there's a lot of non-commercial projects, there's some non-commercial projects that are developing where you're trying to get users to access particular sites for free because it's important. It provides important access to information. So some projects that we've seen so far are Refugees United, which is a mobile app that provides access to refugees so that they can find family members online. Another one is the Smart Health app, which educates Android users in Africa about various diseases. And the third project that I was going to mention is, of course, the project that I'm working on, which is Wikipedia Zero, that gets carriers in developing countries to commit to providing free access, free data when people in developing countries access Wikipedia on their mobile phones. And the project essentially doesn't really impact any of the policy behind net neutrality, but it could be prevented with a definition of net neutrality that covers not only non-discrimination over the transmission of the network, but also at the very end of the network. So the way it doesn't implicate the policies is because essentially it doesn't speed up the access to Wikipedia. It doesn't deprioritize access to other sites. It doesn't include any deep packet inspection, right? It's not needed to figure out how to treat the content. It doesn't include any payment, like the Wikimedia Foundation doesn't pay carriers to zero-rate access to their users, and we don't enter into any kind of exclusive deals. So in other words, it's really the non-commercial nature of Wikipedia is reflected in the Wikipedia Zero project. And although this is just like a handful of projects that are currently developing, I hope that we will be seeing lots more access to knowledge projects in the future, and therefore it's important to have a really clear definition of net neutrality that really protects non-commercial activities and speech, but doesn't go as far as prohibiting non-commercial activities that were not intended to be regulated out by net neutrality.
So we have seen that the net neutrality principle is extremely useful to promote innovation, to allow non-commercial activities to flourish on the internet, creativity. But an aspect that has been considered by the Dynamic Coalition on Net Neutrality is also the relation between the net neutrality principle and the protection of human rights. We have dedicated a report of the Dynamic Coalition that was presented at the IDF some months ago to the relations between net neutrality protection and the human rights protection. We have elaborated a model framework on net neutrality following the stimulus of the Council of Europe, because this model framework has been elaborated by the Dynamic Coalition through a multi-stakeholder, open, transparent process that was essentially done with interactions online. And then this model framework has been delivered to the Council of Europe. And I would like to know if Elvana can hear us so that she can explain us what is the in which activities is the Council of Europe engaging, and what are the plans of the Council of Europe to utilize this model that has been delivered for these further initiatives. Can you hear us, Elvana?
Yes, I can.
Excellent.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Luca, and hello to everyone. I see all the panelists. I know most of them. Hello. But I don't see the people in the audience. And
Hi.
I'd like to say 2 words to the people in the audience about the organization that I represent, the Council of Europe.
You are the channel.
Excuse me? Yeah. Hi, yeah. So Council of Europe is a regional organization which brings together 47 European states. It's not the EU, which has 27 member states. It's a larger organization. The mandate of the Council of Europe is on issues of human rights, democracy, and rule of law. And we work with the governments of all the 47 member states to promote those values, primarily in 3 types of activities: standard setting, developing conventions and other non-binding instruments, international law instruments, monitoring the performance of member states on those instruments, and provide technical assistance to member states. As relates to the internet, you may note that we have a number of conventions: the Cybercrime Convention, the Data Protection Convention, we have the Neutrality Convention, which protects children from sexual abuse and sexual exploitation on the internet as well, and the Crime Convention. As regards non-binding standards, we have standards on the governance of the internet, on the issue of governance of the internet. For example, we have some principles on the governance on the internet, and I'll stop at one of those. We have also provided guidance to our member states on issues of freedom of expression, such as in respect of and blocking search engines, social networks, and so on and so forth. So going back now to the net neutrality topic, which is your theme of discussion, there we have a political support by the 47 member states of the Council of Europe to the principle of network neutrality. And this is manifested in two documents. One is in the set of governance principles, internet governance principles, which I mentioned. There is a specific principle there on which is called open network, and it's support for network neutrality, basically, saying that traffic management should respect freedom of expression and human rights online. And secondly, there is another political statement, a declaration on network neutrality, which is really focused on the issue of network neutrality and looks at this principle from the perspective of freedom of expression and access to information. And it actually defines the principle with the words of having in mind freedom of expression as the ability of individuals to choose and to have access to content and services and applications that they choose to have access to. This statement says that traffic management is not an interference per se, a priori, an interference with freedom of expression, but it can actually amount to such an interference in certain cases, especially when it's not proportionate and when the principle of transparency is not respected. So this is where we are at the moment in terms of political support for the principle. There is also an ongoing initiative to look how to reinforce that standing on network neutrality. We will have a committee of experts which will look at how to to reinforce the principle of network neutrality. We will see what the discussion and what the appetite of the committee of experts will be, and then of our member states on that. But we clearly have a mandate to continue working on the issue of network neutrality, and I'm looking forward to your discussions there to see what can I bring back to the considerations, those discussions that are taking place in the Council of Europe. Now, as regards Europe, another development which I think is worth mentioning, and perhaps some other panelists, perhaps Joe would like to say some words about it, is the consideration by the European Parliament of network neutrality provisions as part of its of a proposal for regulation by the European Commission on the single telecoms market. That is a development which is worth bearing in mind and looking at when we discuss what's the best way actually to develop policy on network neutrality. So I'll leave it at that, Luca, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks a lot, and mainly thanks for participating remotely from France, where it's now 1 o'clock in the night, so you're ready. Thanks a lot. And by the way, if you are interested in reading the paper in which this model framework has been described, and the paper is an official document of the CDNSI, the Steering Committee on Media and Information Society of the Council of Europe. There are some copies there. You can find it on the Council of Europe website and also on the website of the Dynamic Coalition. So now we can keep on with
Okay, so we will now look at how those principles have been or might be implemented at the national level in different jurisdictions. So, Francisco, could you please tell us about the network neutrality regulation that has been enacted in Chile, which is in fact the first country to have implemented the principle of network neutrality into law? And so if you could tell us about this and also share with us what are the positive or the negative lessons that can be drawn from this.
Well, hello everybody. As you know, Chile was the first country that passed a neutrality law back in 2009. If I recall well, let me check. But no, 2010. And as Alejandro was saying, most internet services in countries remain unregulated from a telecommunications law perspective. So, which is good because there's lots of applications or issues that if the internet was being regulated at the very beginning, we would have measuring every kilobyte in our traffic, for instance, that happened at some time when internet services were provided, or maybe there were only some providing services that were approved, or any other restrictions that would have impeded the internet expansion and development as we know now. So, but there are some issues that needed to be regulated, and in the case of Chile, they decided to modify the telecommunications law. So they implemented only 3 articles in their telecommunications law to install some obligations to internet service providers in regards to their internet provision activities. In fact, it's not to internet service providers, it's to public service concessionaries that provides internet access to their users. So they have some obligations and can be classified in 2 big groups. First, there are transparency obligations, disclose the aggregation rates, the speed of the plans they offer, and also to disclose what traffic management measures are the providers taking. And on the other side is to limit these traffic management practices to only the ones that falls into the category of non-arbitrary discrimination activities. So, internet service providers, for instance, can block some ports because of suspicious activity. They can do some traffic management, but first they have to disclose these management activities, And second, they need to, these activities cannot be arbitrary. And this is where the problem begins. Because, yeah, internet neutrality is regulated, but instead we have now this new standard of non-arbitrary discrimination. So what non-arbitrary discrimination is, and our telecommunications authority haven't sorted out yet. So when enforcing our net neutrality law, what has happened is that the transparency obligations are being actively enforced. So if some ISP is publicizing a speed that is turns out to not be the speed that they are offering, or the aggregation rate, or some measures turns out not to be the ones that they are disclosing, this can turn into fines or some other enforcing activities from the telecommunications authority. But when it comes to traffic management in the day-to-day, there's no certainty of what arbitrary discrimination is. So, for instance, one provider in their neutrality information, they say that they distinguish between sensible and non-sensible protocols. So sensible protocols would be like HTTP, video on demand, or voice over IP, because it requires like a time frame to be done. Like if I'm watching a stream movie, I need to see it now. But peer-to-peer file transfer protocols are being like affected by these management practices. So some ISP in Chile can like inform that they do traffic management between 4 p.m. and 2 a.m. and they discriminate between these two kinds of traffic, and they end up the telecommunications authority is not enforcing those sort of traffic management because they feel or they think that it's within the transparency obligations and there's no arbitrary discrimination in such measures. So it's a part of the problem that we are having enforcing the law, but also about what the law objectives were. Sometimes we discuss here in the name of principles or like what we think is correct, but when implementing policy, countries can pursue different objectives. In the case of Chile, this started with some antitrust cases that determined that other companies could offer services over the internet services that the telecommunications providers were offering. So the main point in Chile was to authorize the use of any device over the internet. So the neutrality law had this print on it, besides talking about principles or freedom of expression or other fundamental rights. So we need to deal with what policy situation originated the law, and we need to work with that. So let's keep.
Thank you very much. Carolina, could you talk about the experience in Brazil and how is the Marco Civil supposed to implement the network neutrality principle?
Sure. So I was also previously asked to just give a brief overview on where you find net neutrality debate in Latin America. So I'm just going to mention what's going on, and then I'm going to go a little deeper in the Brazil case. And both at New America Foundation and also in Universidade de Palermo with Eduardo Bertoni, we have been mapping and studying further these cases. So I'm happy to share with you some documents around that if you want later. And of course, the site of the Net Neutrality Coalition, I don't know if you guys had the chance, it's like the most one-stop shop for everything on net neutrality, so that's pretty helpful. So in Latin America, we have some type of regulation regarding net neutrality in Colombia, Chile, as Francisco was mentioning, Peru, Argentina, Brazil, and Ecuador. So it's like we are in a moment with that we see actually a domino effect that of implementation of regulations or laws, and even sometimes when they are not laws debated in the Congress of that country, the equivalent of the FTC or Anatel in Brazil, the Telecommunications Regulation Agency, is taking steps to implement some type of resolution. In that case, in these cases, I think we really need to be paying attention to, because in most of our countries in Latin America, from Brazil, we do have a high influence or impact of the view of one set of stakeholders, which are the telcos, and it's rare to see any case of the telecom agencies, at least in other countries, that have open dialogue with civil society and other stakeholders. So, for example, in Brazil, while we've been discussing the Marco Civil for many, many years, I was doing CTS when that started many years ago. The Anatel took a strong step last year, and not a lot of people paid attention to that, right? Reforming the norm 4, which we call that was the norm that regulated internet for the first time in Brazil many years ago, and reforming what they define as internet. And that redefinition of the concept of internet, through that regulation, put Anatel as one of the regulators also of the internet, which before they were not, they were just regulating telcos. And a lot of people did not pay attention because we still, as advocates, we are very hopeful, and that hope is getting smaller and smaller every day about the Marco Civil. So talking a little bit about the Marco Civil, it has been a really difficult fight over the years because of the very delicate compromises that had to be done, and civil society was always in a debate if we would keep endorsing or not Marco Civil. At the moment, we are not sure anymore, actually. We just changed in December. And one of the big changes introduced in December was a new principle in the Marco Civil, in the set of principles, which is Article 3, on exactly net neutrality, right, which impacts directly net neutrality. So while we have Article 9, assuming we're going to have isonomy and net neutrality for packages and services and data, we do have two exceptions. One exception is related to technical aspects that are necessary for the adequate provision of those services, and also for emergency services. So we already have those exceptions, and then later, in December, they inserted the principle that the freedom of new business models on internet, as soon as they do not conflict with the other principles, and neutrality is also in Article 3. However, when I see that, I have the English version of Marco Civil, I can share with you later. So by bringing that, you put two things that can be contradictory, different diversity of business models, which you can understand in very different ways, including how you manage providing our services and net neutrality. So that's the situation. That was the compromise that Molon, who is the rapporteur of Marco Civil, has justified as the necessary compromise to have the telcos on the side and should move the Marco Civil forward. Today we just got some news that the lead of the opposing party will vote against Marco Civil, so it's going to be really bad. Yeah, it's going to be really worse for Brazil in a moment that we're going to host the Net Mundial. So it's going to be kind of interesting to see that. But that's the stage we are. But in regard to Latin America in general, what is emerging is a matrix of a set of very different exceptions to the net neutrality rule. And I think that does pose a challenge to both companies and advocacy on how we deal with those exceptions and how the telcos agencies actually implement them concretely. So maybe it's the time for all of us to go a step further and maybe bring the engineers with us to say, okay, how we actually implement in a way that they are supporting of the principles.
So we have seen that net neutrality principle, this non-discrimination principle, is instrumental not only to promote innovation, but also to foster the full enjoyment of end users' fundamental rights. And this is one of the reasons why, since 2009 in Europe, the Commission declared its commitment to the net neutrality principle, but bizarrely, a proposal for net neutrality provision has been tabled just some months ago. So I would like to ask Joe McCann from EDRIC to provide us an overview of the current state of play of the net neutrality debate at the European Union level. Joe, please.
Thank you. I'll start with two principles that are useful to understanding what's going on in Europe, because it's not very easy. One of them is a quotation from Otto von Bismarck, who said that anybody who loves laws or sausages should never see either being made. The second is an adaptation of Godwin's law that the longer internet discussion goes on, the more likely it is somebody is going to be compared with Hitler. I would add the McNamee corollary, which says that the longer a net neutrality discussion goes on, the more likely it is that some idiot politician is going to start talking about communism. It will become clear. So, the European Commissioner took office nearly 5 years ago, and she loves net neutrality. She said it again and again and again, and she promised legislation again and again and again. And then somehow the love ended. Somehow things weren't the way they used to be. Somehow they didn't look into each other's eyes the way they used to. And the love was no more. And so the Commissioner decided that she wanted to propose a law that didn't enshrine net neutrality, while using lots of words saying that she did like net neutrality. So the European Commission produced a vast overarching proposal that covers mobile phone roaming, enforcement, net neutrality, some other things. And this text is atrociously badly written, misleading, duplicitous, and a kind of text that you wouldn't want to give to a parliament if the parliament was going to spend much time looking at it. So this text was finished in May of last year, and there are elections in May of this year. So the European Commission thought, you know what, if we give the text to the European Parliament with a whole year to look at it, they're going to notice that it is not very good. So let's delay a little while. So then they launched it in September of last year, giving the Parliament much less time to work on it. But the proposal also includes a provision to bring an end to mobile phone roaming charges, which are quite high in Europe because, well, there are lots of small countries all over Europe, so we incur mobile phone charges more easily. So the parliamentarians have a chance to do something popular just before the election, namely adopt a proposal which includes getting rid of mobile roaming. And at the same time, there's this text which says something about net neutrality that nobody quite understands. So, well, we don't have much time, let's push it through. And there are two major blocs in the European Parliament, socialists and conservatives, with the liberals sitting in between. And the leader of the discussions for the liberals posted a note on Facebook a few days ago saying that anybody that wants to regulate to keep open internet is enforcing communism, because you don't want to keep markets open because that's terrible for something or other. And there we have it. We have a parliament about to adopt a text which it doesn't understand, which goes against the interests of European citizens, of European innovators. But at least we're avoiding communism, and after all, isn't that the most important thing? So I'll stop now and I'll Regan explain the
Excellent. So now I would like to ask to Regan McDonald from Access to elaborate a little bit more on the details of these network neutrality provisions and the peculiar fashion in which they have been rephrased, adding some wording on the prohibition of discrimination within the limits of any contractually agreed data volume or speeds. Thank you.
Thanks, Luca. So as Joe mentioned, we have been dealing with this regulation, and it has been actually quite a challenge to make sense of it because of the way it has been drafted. And while net neutrality, when you do get into writing it down, committing it into a piece of legislation, it does get technical. And this has been causing problems, especially if you consider the fact that members of the European Parliament are not exactly technicians. And then if you add in the other factors that Joe already mentioned with the timing and the elections, you see what kind of mess we've been dealing with in Brussels. And so I'll come to your point in a second, Luca, because I do want to talk about some of the more finer problematic issues of this proposal. But I think it's worth actually just reiterating what net neutrality is, because we have seen since 2009 in the EU and now in the US that this term has very different and creative interpretations depending on who's using this term. And from a campaigning perspective, to inform citizens on the importance of net neutrality is very difficult because it's hard to know what it actually means. So basically, it comes down to three basic principles, which are the guiding principles of the open internet. And the first one is the end-to-end principle. And that just means that all endpoints on the network should connect to all other endpoints on the network. The second is the best effort principle, which means that ISPs should do their best effort to deliver data as expeditiously as possible to these endpoints on the network. And then the third element is the innovation without permission principle, which is one of the most exciting aspects of the internet, which means that anyone, anywhere can innovate without asking the permission of anyone or any entity. And this is really where the human rights dimension comes into net neutrality, because it's not only about innovating in a commercial sense, but also from a freedom of expression perspective. It includes receiving information, but also imparting information. And these are the three key principles. So in this regulation, which is vast, it does look like a net neutrality law in some form. There is a particular provision that does block, or that does prohibit explicit blocking and throttling of applications. And we know from studies conducted from consumers, from BEREC, the regulators, electronic regulators in the EU, that about 1/4 of citizens in the EU are subject to these very blunt and visible forms of restrictions. The problem is that this proposal, while it does include a prohibition on this type of blocking and throttling, it opens the door to new types of discrimination that are much more nuanced. And this is one of the elements that has been brought up already by some panelists, and this is preferential treatment of content and services. And this is one of the elements, and in the proposal it's called specialized services.
So can you tell us something more about how specialized services are being treated by the proposal?
Well, the definition is extremely broad. Technically, there is such thing as specialized services, and this could be an extra service with an enhanced quality that you purchase on top of your internet access. So, for instance, IPTV could be a service that you could buy in addition to your access service. What the regulation fails to do is to define it properly. So right now, and what's even in a lot of the forms, a lot of the definitions in Parliament, it is so broadly defined that it could mean any online service. And this is really where you would destroy the best effort principle, but also this innovation without permission principle. Because what happens is the telcos would get essentially to pick the winners and losers and decide which kinds of services get wrapped up into your internet access. From an innovation and competition perspective, this is a death sentence for innovation in Europe, because you would never have new and innovative services that would be able to break into the market. What you would have instead is telcos, which already have quite a bit of control in the individual member states, picking and choosing the biggest and most popular services. That is normally US services, so you have Twitter, Facebook, Google, and these which people like to use. But if you put them into this internet access service and advertise them as access services, then you lock people into these services, and this is really problematic.
Thanks a lot for highlighting that the freedom of expression dimension of the net neutrality debate is intimately intertwined with the freedom of innovation. So expressing one's creativity means also innovate, produce new innovation in part, and receive information is also in part and receive innovation. So now I would like to ask from in the audience, someone wants to join our panel, rotating in and out. So if there is any volunteer to participate into this fishbowl. Please present yourself before speaking. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Andres Apurbo. I'm from Venezuela. I just wanted to comment on the recent extreme cases of net neutrality violations in my country. This is a recent moves. It's not a situation like in countries where the internet has always been under serious censorship. These are recent moves, sometimes mandated censorship by regulators or other government agencies. Sometimes it seems to be private censorship in order to congratulate themselves with the government from the side of the ISPs or other telco providers. And at the same time, allegations of service degradation on purpose nationwide, while at the same time throttling certain apps. This in a country where the already slow internet access and unreliable connections casted limitations on freedom of information and expression. For example, streaming video from professional sources like TV stations, TV networks from locals or from abroad, or from amateurs perhaps recording what's happening in a protest or a conference, for example. I mean, having people sending that video and then downloading it doesn't almost make sense at all. I mean, it's a real problem because of the lack of connection speeds and the reliable connections themselves. And now you add to that throttling certain apps, it becomes a really complicated panorama, especially since when, for example, in Venezuela, they recently blocked for almost 2 days images on Twitter. They blocked the server that serves all the images and interface parts for Twitter. That obviously was became viral, became easy to see, something easy to prove. I mean, technically, you could easily ping the server, you could trace route to the server, and you find where exactly the trace route ends. And actually, Twitter confirmed this happening. But if you throttle apps, then it becomes harder to realize what's going on. And you could throttle apps to the point that they just don't work. You could make the connection so slow that you just can't send images or you can send video. So, and that's really hard to prove. So I don't know what other opinions this panel have on these particular issues.
Do you have any reactions from you?
Just to point out the censorship angle. Bizarrely, in the European proposal, there's a provision that included reasonable traffic management to enforce a court order or to prevent or impede serious crime, and which is contrary to the ICCPR, it's contrary to the European Charter of Fundamental Rights, it's contrary to the European Convention on Human Rights. And then you end up in a situation where ISPs will be able to ingratiate themselves, exactly as you said, which then, quid pro quo, will lead to more opportunities for them to abuse their network for anti-competitive reasons, and then the circle continues. So that's a very important point,
Very quickly, you pointed out something very important in the Latin American context, especially for small countries. We have telecom monopolies, big corporations who are have very close love relationship. We can describe it as such with the governments, with the parliaments. They can buy laws, basically. And so that makes it really hard to pass a net neutrality law in many countries in Latin America because the monopolies, which are regional monopolies, block the possibilities to do so. And mostly US or European monopolies interfering in the policy making. And a very concrete example, very similar to the situation right now in Venezuela. It happened during the Honduras coup. And it's so ironic that because it's regional monopoly and it is cheaper to use the same equipment and the same platforms to serve Guatemala and Honduras. There was a collateral effect that WordPress was blocked in Honduras and was blocked partially in places in Guatemala where the infrastructure was shared. Another point is that many countries, small countries, lack antitrust law. So it is like really internet users in developing countries which are mostly disconnected right now, and totally defenseless. So in Europe, it's super important for innovation. In Latin America, in many countries where the connectivity is so slow, and the connected are only the middle class and the privileged, it is an issue of social inclusion because the poor are accessing the consumer web, not the creative web. And I think that it's important to point out close relationship and closing the possibility of progress.
Francisco, and then a comment from the gentleman over there, and then.
I think that when a country has a strong human rights framework in place, you wouldn't need a neutrality law to impede censorship. It's because there's like a bigger fundamental right at stake, like freedom of expression. But even with that, the neutrality laws are really useful to have extra enforcement systems for the private sector to avoid content blocking. But it's not the only thing to rely on, and when you have like institutional weaknesses, as is my opinion, it's happening in Venezuela, even a neutrality law maybe wouldn't help in that case. So it's like thinking that instating a data protection law would protect us from the NSA spying, and the neutrality law would protect us with a country that has like bigger weaknesses on their institutional frameworks.
I'm Tim Carr with the Press. I just wanted to make a comment. I think that earlier, the panel that went before, the Verizon policy specialist said that, and I quoted him, he said, net neutrality is a beautiful terminology, but it doesn't really apply to the internet as we know it. And I think it's important for us, those of us who actually think it's more than beautiful terminology, to actually define it. And I applaud that effort, because what will happen if you don't define it is that you'll get people like the policy VP from Verizon trying to change that definition and constantly changing the definition to a point where it confuses the issue and they can get away with doing things that are clear violations of net neutrality. And I think your experience in the EU Parliament was very similar, where you had someone say, oh, I'm for net neutrality, but when you get down to the process of actually writing it into law, everybody sorts it back away. So we need this, these three principles are important. We need to have that sort of common definition so that we can't allow these people, whether they're from industry or government, to start to weasel away from it.
So I just want to reply saying that in the model law we have elaborated, we have precisely defined net neutrality, and it has been a definition it has been the fruit of a collaborative effort. So it's not just a definition for lawyers or for techie, but it's a multi-stakeholder definition. Sorry for using the term multi-stakeholder. And then I am going over your comment.
Thank you. Very briefly, what you have in Venezuela, if things are like they have been described by Andres, and we understand some of them are that way, you just have censorship. You don't have to go into this baroque filigree of net neutrality after principles. You have censorship, filtering and blocking. So reactions should not be distracted, in my opinion. Nor do I think that, and Francisco already leads to it, that a law on net neutrality is the best thing to have. In many cases, I think it would actually be a loss if you have, depending on the country, if you have consumer rights, if you have competition law and so forth, many of them are better principles. The way they are articulated and the way the contracts are written, because you are always speaking about something that you get from a private service. So in many places, it would be consumer law, competition law that are actually a better tool to keep network neutrality enforced. And I think one proof has been given by Carolina Rossini here. When you mentioned the third provision now introduced into the law, which is innovative business models as an exception for network neutrality, that is exactly the language that ETNO, the European Telecommunication Network Operators organization, is using in Europe to undermine the network neutrality. That's it. So, but that tells that, you know, as was Francisco said about Bismarck, that's actually the reason why many of us in Latin America are very worried that the Marco Civil legislation was actually put to Congress, because you know what goes into sausages, but you know in what state it emerges.
Yeah, so I would like to, I think there is a comment there, Madam, do you want to?
Hi, my name is Pilar. I'm from Colombia, and I don't know, it's because we are part of the same local system in America Latina, but we have also in Colombia problems with net neutrality. And in our case, it's similar that the point that said Renata point of view, that some of the problem is about the monopolies. In my country, in this moment, the regulation of net neutrality accepts the idea of the market segmentation. And for us, it's a huge problem because when you go to pay a service for mobile, you can accept only a plan who includes only chat or mail and social network, and they sell that as internet. And of course, that's an internet. So when we accept that idea of market segmentation, we accept that internet is something different that the real internet is. And we can't say anything because there is not a regularly mark, and there is no way to try to push a real definition because there is not a real definition of net neutrality. So I think that that's part of the problem, and it's a problem with the local telcos who has a lot of power, and it's a problem with the local NGOs that we don't have enough power to say that at the local level. So, I don't know.
Thanks a lot. So I would like to ask for some closing remarks from the panelists, because we are running out of time, and I would like to start from Joe, that is eager on providing us.
I just wanted to comment on the monopoly issue, because there are two monopolies, possible monopolies at the same time. Going back to Ethno during Wicked talked about ascending party pays model. That means that the world pays for access to my customers. My customers are my monopoly. If I've got 20% of the market in the country, only 20%, you can't get access to them unless you go through me. So the idea is the creation of artificial monopolies. Even if there are 5 services in the market, if you have net neutrality, if you don't have net neutrality, you have to pay to get in. And the outside looking in issue is the one that competition can't solve. The end user can choose ISP number 1, ISP number 2, or ISP number 3, but if an ISP that controls 20% of the market says, you didn't pay, you don't get in, you don't even have a relationship with that ISP. You've got no leverage. You either pay, as Netflix will tell you, you either pay up or you go away. There's no competition, there's no choice.
Just one comment. Also in Europe, to Renata's comment about this love relationship between telcos and governments, that also exists in the EU. And I hope that this approach of calling net neutrality something that it is not doesn't actually spread to other parts of the world. And on this proposal, there is a possibility to actually fix it. There is some decent aspects in there. having, you know, proper definitions of the specialized services that would prevent this tiering problem. Having, you know, a clear regulation that prohibits anti-competitive practices is also very good. Limits on reasonable traffic management, transparency around practices. This could be done. So we will find out in the next few months what path the EU will take, what 28 countries will essentially decide whether or not they will go for not neutrality or net neutrality. And we have an ongoing campaign, and it's called SaveTheInternet.eu, where you can go and call, email, even fax your member or a member of the European Parliament to let them know just how important this is. And we also have some of our papers around which describe in greater detail the finer points and the finer problems of the regulation and what you can do to help.
Yeah, I think what we've heard a lot is this sort of the definitional problem. And I think that where we are at right now is when we're beginning to see a lot of net neutrality laws being developed, and so it's really important at this point to kind of reach out and figure out exactly what are we talking about, what are we trying to regulate, how do we get there, in sort of thinking ahead and making sure that we're regulating the precise problem and not regulating away solutions, right? Not regulating away free speech and innovation. So I just want to emphasize that.
Sorry, there is also a closing remark from one of our
yes, thank you so much.
rotating panelists.
My closing remark. Thanks, everybody. My name is Josh. I'm also from Free Press. I just want to mention that net neutrality exists in the United States too as an issue, and I'm sorry that we weren't able to talk about that today, although this was really illuminating and educational. SaveTheInternet.com is also, I was struck by the .eu. That's an awesome site. There's another awesome site that you should check out, which is SaveTheInternet.com, which is about US-focused net neutrality issues, which is a bit on fire at the moment. Also, just kind of address the Wikimedia thing, because I feel like there's this implication that somehow net neutrality would harm non-commercial speech, and I just want to say that from my perspective, and I think a lot of people's perspective, that's absolutely not true, and in fact it empowers non-commercial speech more than anything. And the issue that you're talking about, which is making deals with carriers to provide websites free of charge to consumers, or free of data charges, is another related issue, and in a lot of people's opinion, very problematic, non-commercial or not, because it creates a very, very narrow version of the internet, which is not actually the internet at all. It's a portal into certain sites that make deals with, monetary or not, with the ISPs. And so I just want to say that I love Wikipedia, but I think it's a mistake to make that kind of deal with carriers.
Yeah, okay. Double closing remark.
Yes, well, I think so we'll have to agree to disagree on that, but generally I don't think that it creates a narrow internet, because if specifically defined, it wouldn't be something where it can interfere with an open internet, right? You're going to be respecting the end-to-end principle and freedom to innovate and so forth. So it's not, I don't think it's like, it depends on where you draw the line, and I think that it is possible to define exceptions narrowly, specifically because there currently are exceptions in most net neutrality regulation that is drawn narrowly to address corporate interests that I wouldn't agree with, but I think that what we really do need are exceptions that address non-commercial activities online that would encourage social innovation in a completely different way. And it kind of goes to goes back to the fact that net neutrality is in essence a antitrust regulation, and non-commercial activities generally are not normally regulated under such provisions. And so the fact that the internet is somehow different is a strange concept in that sense.
So I can do other closing remarks, but I just wanted to comment a little bit on that because I actually think there is a better rhetoric for Wikimedia in this section. So I did some work in the past for Wikimedia, helping to develop the Brazilian chapter or the Brazilian whatever. And one of the things I saw right there, and one of my other hats is like I'm advocate for open educational resources, etc. Right? So one of the things that Wikimedia did well in some countries that internet's not there yet, or at least it's just there by default, is actually to do some of these deals to arrive on the phone and to be included, for example, in one laptop or child, etc., etc. So I agree, Josh, actually with you. I don't agree with you, that's right, I agree with you. But I also see that some of the deals are important to take a piece of the internet and a piece of a material that can be seen as educational resource to some regions where that's not possible otherwise. So I think there is another rhetoric that we should be thinking on in terms of these agreements. But anyway, in terms of my last message, I just want to be sure that the Net Neutrality Dynamic Coalition did a wonderful job putting a lot of things online, but I think now we are in a moment to go a step further and understand what are the exceptions and how should those be implemented in a moment that, as I mentioned, a lot of countries have or laws or resolutions, and in some cases those resolutions come from the telco regulator. So one of the things that would be interesting, and I'm saying that because I call on folks in the audience to join this effort, a lot of other efforts need some principles like the necessary, proportionate, and some other things like that. So is it time for us to build a set of principles that go more into detail on what should be done or not in terms of regulating net neutrality? I'm not sure, right? We have risks, as Alejandro pointed, but if we are practical about the fact there are already legislations and resolutions, how can we contribute for that?
I would just ask you to be extremely brief because we are running out of time.
20 seconds. I just want to, I totally agree with Josh on the points that he made. I will not repeat them. And regarding what Carolina said, I think that the pending task here is to collaborate in a fine way to implement a good net neutrality frame. It can be by law, it can be by regulation, it can be just a guideline for the telcos in the countries where legislative steps impossible to take. Just that.
No, it's really quick. It's like nobody talk about the Comcast and Netflix agreement, but it's really simple. Some people say that there's no regulation on the internet, or that it is unregulated, and that's not true. Deals like this tends to shape the internet, tends to create rules in the internet and laws in the internet. So now the private sector is regulating the internet without the intervention of the state. So that's why urgency to be aware and take care of that from a public interest and human rights perspective.
I hope you have some closing remarks. I already did. Excellent, perfect. So I would like to thank every participant, the public, everyone. The efforts of the dynamic coalitions are ongoing. People established 8 months ago, so we still have a lot of things to do. If you want papers, everything, go on network.info, and thanks a lot to everyone. Oh, sorry, Ivan, we have a closing remark. I think he doesn't. So thanks a lot to everyone.